I think we are all set. I have to do a disclaimer real quick, just letting everybody know that I am not rapping this year. So if you need to leave, I understand. But Zdravé! You are in the room to talk about everything you need to Node. And that pun is fully intended. So I hope you enjoy it. Just out of curiosity, how many people here are currently using Node? Oh, nice. Good. I will give you some resources, too, if you're just getting started with Node or you want to get started with Node. I highly recommend you do Node. You wouldn't have guessed that from what I'm talking about, though, would you? So what are we doing here? Not just in general. This isn't that theoretical. But what are we doing here in this talk? We're going to first do an overview, a really quick overview, of the usual suspects that you usually see people using Node for. And then we'll talk about and spend more time on the more unusual suspects of what you may not have guessed you could use Node for, what Node is good for that you may not be using it for currently. And then we're going to do what you might suspect. We are going to talk about, or actually walk through the code of creating a Node application, just a really quick, real-time using socket chat application, at the end using Vue, and creating it with a progressive web app, but I'll talk about that a little later. So who is this person talking at you? My name is Tara Mniksik, and I am a developer advocate on the Progress team working with Kinvey, and also a Google developer expert working in web technologies. I started the Cincinnati branch of Women Who Code and helped start the Cincinnati branch of Node School. So by the power of deduction, you may realize I am from Cincinnati, Ohio. I want to talk to you real quick. Node School, if you're getting started with Node, is a really great resource, especially if you're comfortable in the command line in the terminal, because it's basically a bunch of open source free lessons that you run through the terminal. So it gets you comfortable with the file structure, how Node is served up through the terminal, and basically just getting started with JavaScript, Node, the tooling around Node. It's really nice. I'm pretty biased, but I think it's really great. And then I also help, I guest host, and I'm the program manager for a Node-centric podcast called Always Forward with Disha. And we have a lot of the Node contributors on the show. I have a show this Tuesday covering the JS Foundation and Node Foundation merger, which sounds really boring, but I swear I'll try to make it interesting, because it's actually pretty cool. And I'll have, this is my Twitter handle, tzmannix. I'll have the slides on here because there's some good resources for you to check out. But I'm really, really excited to be here. This is my second time here, and I have so much fun. This time I'm drinking a little, or actually no rakia. For some reason they tell me not to drink for 2. I don't know. But I always love it here nonetheless. So I'm very happy to be here. And then also on the Twitter handle, this is Tosh Magosh, who you will find on my Twitter feed a lot. This is her actual size. This is why we had to use a theater, so we could demonstrate how big she actually is. But check that out. So jumping into what we're here to talk about. If you're not familiar with Node.js, it's the JavaScript runtime built on Chrome's V8 JavaScript engine. It's been around for a while, and it's primarily used for non-blocking, event-driven servers because it has a single-threaded nature. It's traditionally used for websites and back-end API services. It's really light and scalable and fast, so it is really good for building scripts. So one thing you see it used a lot for is microservices. And if you're not familiar, microservice architecture is basically a way of developing applications as a group, but of independent, small, and modular services. So they all run a unique process and play a specific role in an overarching larger business logic. So you'll see microservices and the monolithic applications. Node and JavaScript in general, you'll hear we talk about it being modularized a lot. There's a lot of module system because you're basically trying to break up one goal for one project. You know, like programming in general, you're hoping to have that. And then backend in general. So one thing you hear all the time when people are like, what is Node? The most succinct way that people say is like, oh, JavaScript on the backend. It's JavaScript on the backend. So in turn, what you get, another usual suspect, is backend microservices, right? So the redundancy is intentional because I think we tend to have a kind of small scope in our minds of what Node is. Because we just think of backend, we just think of microservices and modularizing things. But then these are the unusual suspects that we're going to go into detail. So I'll just skim over these quickly. We're going to talk about real-time applications, games, machine learning, universal rendering, file reading and parsing, and IoT. Is anybody using Node for any of these things right now? Haha, oh, fine. Okay, one person. Okay, so jumping in and talking about real-time. So the creation of Node, it came from this guy named Ryan Dahl, and his whole point was he wanted to make real-time websites with push capability. We didn't have it at the time. He wanted to give developers a tool for working in basically this non-blocking, event-driven I/O paradigm. And it was like 20 years that we hadn't had that. And he knew that developers needed that we wanted it. The way that the web was advancing, there was a lot that we needed from that. So for, again, 20 years, it was basically a stateless request-response paradigm. And now we finally have web applications with real-time, two-way connections. And this is really where Node shines, is in web applications technology over WebSockets. That's how you get real-time. So there's a lot of companies and applications that utilize this real-time sense for their applications. There's Netflix, Walmart, PayPal, LinkedIn, eBay, NASA. Do you know any of those, possibly? Yeah, maybe, okay. What's cool about, I'm a Lyft person, but whatever. Uber actually was proving their success by when they first switched to Node, and it might even be better from this now, but they were able to process over 2 million remote procedure calls per second. So 2 million RPCs, even at their peak time. So there's just so much information that they're able to get in and out so quickly. And this is exactly something that Node is good for. So Aaron Hammer worked at Walmart Labs, and Walmart was having a really hard time with their Black Friday sales. Their servers would crash every Black Friday because for some reason, us humans think that we need to spend lots of money right at that time, right at that day of time of year. So they brought in Node and rewrote all of their backend services in Node, and they had no crashes whatsoever just from that switch. Aaron Hammer has since moved on, but Walmart Labs is still a big advocate for Node and does a ton of their work in Node. And Node is really great for streaming applications because as a native stream API. So things like Netflix, this is why Netflix uses them and is also a big advocate of Node. In particular, Node has an interface of readable and writable streams that can be processed and monitored really efficiently. I thought that was a question. I was going to help you find your seat. All these instances are basically Unix pipes. So they're transmitting parts of the app's executable code, and they're able to keep the connection open for new components to download on demand. So again, you have these things that are able to happen simultaneously in real time. A really serious application that shows you just how well you can do this is this Draw With Me app. So basically, you can have as many people as you want go to this website and draw simultaneously. I was going to do a demo, but I don't trust any of you. So this is basically, I'm showing you a very simple application, but the point of this is kind of telling you how you can do collaboration apps really well with Node.js because of its event-based architecture. It works with the WebSockets, two-way exchange of messages between the client and the server, all on one connection. And when you basically are able to install that WebSocket library both on the server and the client, you're able to get that real-time messaging, but it also lowers the overhead and latency and makes it faster data transfer than the other more conventional or more used solutions. But basically, again, with the event-driven architecture is why you get such really great ability to do collaboration applications. Now I want to talk about fun and games. So I don't really recommend making a really big game on here, but it sounded cooler than just talking about data-heavy single-page applications. But Node is really great for SPAs because it has really efficient handling of asynchronous calls and heavy I/O workloads. So a lot of these applications really take advantage of the fact that Node, its event loop, allows you to delay multiple concurrent requests from the client. And that gives you smooth transitions between views and seamless data updates, which is nice, especially for those really data-driven SPAs, where the server acts as a backend that provides the data to the client, whereas the client does all the HTML rendering. So there are some game examples, though. Is anybody familiar with the T-Rex game on the 404 for Chrome? Yeah. So if you ever feel like you want to make that in Node, here is a great tutorial on how to do that. And then we also have this one that is also, unless you're really serious about 2D cars driving around and hitting each other, it's not a very serious application. But it's really fun. You're able to, you and your friends or strangers, sign into this application and make the cars drive around. But more importantly, this tutorial gives you a great way to introduce yourself to how your users are able to communicate over the web using WebSockets and Node.js. And it's a pretty quick tutorial, too. It's nice to just play with that. So into the fun stuff. Machine learning. If you've seen, Jen Looper had a talk yesterday on machine learning where she talked about TensorFlow.js a little and TensorFlow Lite for mobile. TensorFlow is one of the really great libraries. Basically, you're training and deploying machine learning models, and you're able to do it on the web and do it in Node. TensorFlow base library is built in Python, and then they went ahead and branched out and did a TensorFlow.js for JavaScript. And Ryan Dahl, the creator of Node, actually created his own machine learning language or library called Propel. But he decided, after he saw TensorFlow.js came out, because it was Propel happened, then TensorFlow.js happened. But he saw TensorFlow.js, saw how much effort they had put into how good it was, and decided to say, OK, we're going to stop with Propel. Everybody just focus on TensorFlow.js. All the code that he's written is still out there. It's all open source. You can find it. But it's interesting because not often do you see people creating technology that are like, OK, all that work I just did for the past however many months, go ahead and scratch that for this other person's library. So it's nice to see that he's interested in the collaboration towards a greater machine learning good. But check that out. It's really fun to play with on there. And to get a look at it at Project Base, there's this really great article that a good friend, Minko Getchev, just came out with. If you're not familiar with Minko, you should be, because even your president knows him. And he actually got like a really great recognition, because he's been doing a lot of really great work. He's from Bulgaria. And he's just all around amazing and makes a lot of really great technology. He actually is now officially on the Google Angular team. But in his free time, he decided to create this application so that he could play Mortal Kombat using body motions. And he did this with TensorFlow.js. And in this article, you can check it out. It's at his blog I have listed here. But in this blog, I have to note everything that he does in here. He collected training data for image classification, performed data augmentation using ImageAug, did transfer learning with MobileNet, binary classification, and n-array classification, did training with an image classification, used TensorFlow.js model and Node.js and in the browser, and just made this really cool thing where he's able to control the Mortal Kombat game. I'm really scared of the one move where they rip the spine out. I hope that's not, you don't need a partner for that, but it's a really cool article. I highly recommend checking it out. He does a great job just walking through all of that. So going a little more towards the front end side of things, I want to talk a bit about taking over the universal rendering. So what this is basically, if you're not familiar, front-end applications are just having more and more data that they need to load, that they need to bring to their users. And it's really heavy on the client side. So what we try to do, and I focus mostly on front-end JavaScript libraries, but they're trying to give the server more of the workload. Someone's playing with a yo-yo right over there. Is my talk that interesting? No, I was impressed. It was really good. Yeah, so we have this article here talking about operationalizing Node for server-side rendering, and it's from Airbnb. It says it's a 17-minute read, which is such a lie. It's a really intricate, long article on how Airbnb basically looked at each node process that they were using for server-side rendering and broke down how they could make it better, what they didn't like about it, and really went in depth about it. So that's a good one if you really want to delve in. And then Vue.js in particular has an in-depth guide about server-side rendering with Node.js. And they are committed to doing this. There was just a conference in Salt Lake City where there was a collaborators summit, and it took collaborators from, some of the core contributors from Elm, Ember, Vue, Angular, and React. And they did so much talk about server-side rendering because that's what people are looking for now because all these applications are so big and have so much data. So that's worth checking out. And also, this server-side rendering article for Angular. And again, they say the simplest and quickest SSR approach. There's nothing simple and quick about it. They are saying simplest and quickest, but server-side rendering is still such a mystery, and it is still so complicated. So all of these, even this is a step-by-step guide for Angular with examples, which is nice, but it is a hard process, a hard thing to go through. But Node is there to try and make it better, to try and make it easier, to give you some help. But pay attention, if this is something you're interested in, it's ever-changing. People are still looking for best practices. It's quite interesting in itself. Opposite of interesting, this sounds really boring. But again, JavaScript is really great for scripts because it's fast and it's lightweight. So it makes file reading and parsing really great and really easy. So a lot of people like to take advantage of Node for that. If you check out, this is Flavio, and he has, it's like Flavio Copes. I don't think I'm pronouncing that right, but he does a bunch of different blog posts. It's listed right up there. Just on different strategies and different tools and different things that you can make with Node that are really interesting and will help you a lot in your workflow in general. So I highly recommend just checking out his site. But he has an article specifically on parsing JSON with Node.js. And it's really taking advantage of, again, this is JavaScript, taking advantage of the JSON parse command that we got from ECMAScript 5. Just a quick note, the fact that it's a good thing to remember, and I always think this is something that we already know and already think about, and it's prevalent in our minds with Node, but just a reminder that it's JavaScript, right? So then you're able to have JavaScript both on the front end and the back end, and make it a little more seamless for yourself. And then you also don't have to do as much context switching, as much switching with the teams on, you know, oh, we're doing Ruby on Rails on the back, JavaScript on the front. You're able to have a little bit less bumpy, seamless transition. So just a little side note. Which also brings me to Node's documentation in general. Their file system is one of the best things about Node. They put a lot of effort and a lot into their file system, even giving you all the methods in synchronous and asynchronous forms. I actually did a podcast with some of the core contributors, and on the far left is Anna Henningsen. And she did a ton of work on the file system, and you'll see it. We have Node 10 LTS right now, and Node 11's out. But she did so much work working on the file system to optimize it so it's even better and gives you more functionality. And that's the thing, she talks about it here in this podcast that she's most excited about. So again, another resource to check out. And this episode is actually on HTTP 2, but we won't talk about that today. My favorite section. So how many people here do IoT out of curiosity? Okay, so a handful. It's awesome, it's great. But one of the great things is Node is really good to handle the information that you're getting in from your IoT devices. Basically, it has the ability to process multiple concurrent requests and events emitted by like thousands or even millions of these devices on the network. Which usually, I mean, not my stuff I'm doing with IoT, but most enterprise level or like where you're actually using this professionally, you're going to have so many devices. You need this kind of processing power. And basically, you're getting all of the requests and data coming from IoT devices. It doesn't block the Node.js servers thanks to the event-driven architecture and that asynchronous processing, which is suitable for those I/O-heavy operations on that IoT network. This gives you a really fast layer in between your application and the databases that are used to store all of the data originating from your IoT devices. One of my favorites is Tessel. And I may also be super biased about this too, because this is how I found my career in Node. I went to a meetup because I really love electronics, but I just graduated with a CS degree, and I was like, do I want to do Ruby on Rails or do I want to do JavaScript? And just as a side note, in the popularity charts, like Ruby's going way down, so I was right. But so Tessel is this really great. It's basically another. It's an IoT and robotics platform, and it's an open source project run by volunteers. But if you're ever interested in getting started with IoT, this is a great way to start because they basically give you plug and play capabilities. So this is the main board down here, the Tessel 2, and in that hub right there is one of their modules. So they come with, you can order prefab modules that have all the sensor information, all the electronics hooked up correctly to plug into the main microcontroller, so you don't have to figure that out. And then you use NPM to install the library for that module and use Node to have the conversation between those two. But you can also customize it like that lower one right there and make your own board, make your own sensors, make your own NPM module, And they give you a great way to talk through it. So I actually did a talk at OSCON this year where I took a pre-made light sensor and then made my own moisture sensor module and like soldered that all up to hook it together. So you would put it in your plant, and when the moisture was low in the plant to a certain extent, and when there wasn't enough light, you would basically get like a dead plant push notification to scare you, because I killed a lot of plants. So I needed something. But it's just basically gives you a really good way to make IoT more accessible, to start your introduction to IoT more, and really get all those like projects you have on your back burner of like, I'm going to do this one day. Gives you a little stepping stool to get there. Another great one is Johnny 5, and this is another robotics and IoT platform based on JavaScript and Node. And it was released by Boku about 6 years ago. And they have a really robust, extensible, composable ecosystem. And you see here they're using an Arduino Uno in there, but you can use the Tesla 2 with this, BeagleBone, and the Edison Particle. I think there's more on that list as well. But they make it so you're able to use what you want to use. And they have great tutorials on how to do that. So one of the hardest things about IoT is being able to possibly go outside the comfort zone of your preferred language and start to work with the different microcontrollers and talk to them and figure out how to talk to the sensors and whatnot. So these two libraries, Tesla and Johnny 5, really make it easier for you to get in there and just use Node. So you're just talking to it in Node and doing everything that you would love to do with IoT. So I want to use this time now to jump into code. And excuse me, we are going to be making a real-time chat application. We're going to be connecting a Vue application with Node, and we're going to make it a progressive web app. So real quickly, progressive web apps, because it's like, why did I need to make it a progressive web app? And it's because I think all my applications should be progressive web apps. And there was a talk yesterday Joe Franchetti had on, it's like Go progressive web app Rangers. It's really good yesterday morning. As a reminder, we will have all of these talks taped, so you can check that out in the future. But progressive web apps basically are web applications that take advantage of modern web technology and APIs that will give you a more reliable and accessible application. But like the way they do this is they try to make it more engaging by giving you the ability to have push notifications for your users. They make it more accessible by making sure that you're always responsive. It's progressive because you can make it a progressive web app using service workers, but it always checks it, so you're never breaking anything. And it's more reliable because you're able to do things like offline caching, so that when you don't have a reliable network, you can fall back to your cached resources. So that's pretty much PWAs in a nutshell. But on the Progress blogs, we have a whole series from Raymond Camden that walks you through progressive web apps, and I highly recommend it. So let's look at the code. So the first thing I want to do is install I'm not typing with one hand, this is pre-recorded. You install the Vue CLI to get the latest version and do it globally. Also, what's really nice about Video Magic is we don't actually have to wait for NPM. Not that NPM is slow or anything. And the next step you want to do is actually install, again, the CLI plugin for PWAs on from NPM. So this plugin is new to the third CLI version from Vue, but it's basically giving you a manifest.json and a service worker file. So we go inside, we create the project using Vue Curate, and I actually called this Toshmygosh, and then we set up the defaults and let this run to install. So basically, if you have never used the Vue CLI before, like a lot of CLI tools, it's giving you the skeleton for the project. So you don't have to think about all the file structure, everything that goes in with it. It's a great learning tool because you can break things and try to figure out how to fix them. But it's also great if you've done this so many times. So we go inside the project and open up the file directory. And the first file that we want to go to is inside the source directory. I had to think about that, I guess. And then go to app view. And we're going to first basically change what we have for the header, because that's obviously really important. And then go inside and delete a bunch of stuff and change this to the new component we're going to add, which is the chat component. So we want to import that chat component from components chat. And then change the things inside the component. And I wanted to show you that I changed some styling, but I wanted to do it really fast so you couldn't see how bad I am at CSS, because CSS is hard. Definitely not my forte. So inside here, we went to change, go inside of components and change the name of this starter hello component to chat. And this is using nerd tree, but it's basically saying, rewrite this so I don't have to exit where I am right now and do that through the terminal, through the command line. And delete everything that's inside of that template because we don't need it. Change that class to chat because this is now the chat component. And we first create a div that looks at, that has all the messages. And we do a v4 and look at each message and add an index to it and put the that lived inside of messages. And you can argue with this indentation with me later. But then we set a key index. I never know where to indent that, and it makes me crazy. Anyway, so inside there, for each message, we want to have a from that passes the username from that message. And we also want to pass an image that we bind to source, and that message is going to have a link to an image. And we're just going to set the alt to a Toshoji. Trademark. So we want to close that div and then open up a footer, we'll call it chat footer, that has the information that the user is going to put in. So first we do a form, and we want it to do send message when you submit it. And inside, we're going to have form input that is basically just asking for the user's name, and we're going to assign that to user. Under that, we're going to have an input button or input text that is going to bind user to that V model. And then inside here, we will have a button that has you pick a random image of Toshmagosh. So this is the Toshoji that you're picking. So we close out that, close out the button, close out the div, and eventually close out the form. And then we want to go down and now work on the things that we're sending through. So inside of where you're exporting the information, we change the name to chat because why not? And then we also want to import I/O from an install we'll do later of socket.io client. Because that's what we're using for the WebSockets, right? So we also want to return a bunch of data. We're going to first set the user and the message and empty and messages to an empty array. And then this is where we start using socket. And we call on I/O and pass it where we're going to be sending this node server that has our socket information on it. So that's just a link to the website that's hosting that. And then I have a gallery of Toshojis. So that's all that information, which we obviously could have put somewhere else. But I figured just for this, we would just throw it there. And now we have these methods for when we have these connections and send connections to the socket. So send message that we get on submit, we send event and do prevent default. And then we say emit to the socket, send message. So the socket sees send message. And then we're going to send this data of the user and the message information. And this is where we randomize which image gets sent. Because again, I wanted to control it because I don't trust you. So After that, we basically are going to make sure that each time this gets sent through, we just clear out the message. And then we'll say that when we have a socket mounted, we are going to listen for when we have a message coming through. We're going to get that data, and then we use a spread operator to make an array of those messages with that data. Again, I can never use default fonts, so I'm always using Google Fonts, and that is probably the most time I spend on every single project that I do. It's ridiculous. So I hope you appreciate these fonts. But so now we're done with everything on the front end. We're going to go inside here and actually create a directory for our server, and this is where we're going to be doing all of our node work. Inside server, we go ahead and create a index.js inside of the server directory. I don't know, my baby's kicking me really hard right now. I think it's really excited about this. So you go inside the directory and you run npm init, which is like most inits, you're initializing the information for the application, filling out everything that goes inside the package.json. So then we go inside, or first we install Express and Socket.io. And you'll see where we use this in the index.js file. So we go ahead and call in Express, which is a framework for Node. Not completely necessary, but most Node applications you want to use that for help create your server. And then we do const app Express and set the port to 3000. Then we create the server using Express and tell it to listen, or tell Express to listen to that server on the port that we've designated. So you can set that as an environment variable as well, whichever you prefer. And once that's connected, we want to console log out that it's listening on this port. And we use backticks so that we can use string literals inside of that console log. After that, we start to go inside and use I/O for the WebSocket information. So we pull in Socket.io, just labeling it I/O, and then pass in the server that we have set above. So when we have a connection with I/O, we pass it the socket, and then we also, we're passing in the socket to this function saying, console.log this information of the socket. And I chose to do socket ID just for sanity's sake. You don't have to check this out. More importantly, we're saying when you have a send message come through, like that we admitted from the front end, we're going to get this data item, and I want you to emit the message back to that application with that data, and that's it. Like that's all the node that you need to write to get that real-time application. So like all of that information you're basically requiring pulling stuff in, and then there's that 2 lines at the bottom, which I actually could have all fit on one line really. That is saying there are 2 things you're going to do. When you get a message, immediately send that message back with the data that you have. So what does this look like? I'm going to go ahead and you can check out this link here on your, since it's a PWA, it's responsive on your mobile devices. But you can check it out on line 2. But I have it set up. I didn't trust the Wi-Fi here, funnily enough. So I made sure to have some windows open running it already. I'll keep this open down here. So you can see we have one window here. Let's hope it works. And you can set your name here. And, oh, look. And please be good on this with writing your name. I'm giving you the ability to write your name. And be good, because it'll be really weird if you get beat up by a pregnant lady at a tech conference. So you see, like, these are different people sending things in. My manager is putting one up. And so you're seeing it's happened rapidly that, I could be on 2 different ones. And there's a broken image. Let's ignore that. Oh, there's one from TJ. So you can see that I can also send them from different windows on my machine and have them come through knowing that it's a different one. Yes, that is Toshmagosh peeing in a forest. So so basically you're able to get through the feed different images simultaneously from different devices. And we basically wrote a front end and like a few lines in Node. So that's just how quickly you can take advantage of these real-time things. Nobody's going to be listening now, right? Everybody's just going to be looking at pictures of Toshmagosh. But yeah, all of that code also is available here at this repo. I definitely think it's fun to be able to go through and basically write all those out, see what you find interesting, and change it up. So like, for instance, you see that I had all the latest ones coming from the bottom. You can switch that up, figure out how you can have users put their own images in. There's also another fun one to look at. It's called MeatSpace. It's like meatspa.ce. I don't know why that's the name, but it's basically a chat that you send a message and you send a GIF along with each message that you send. It's really fun, oddly time-consuming. But I wanted to end on, I usually have a lot of jokes dispersed throughout my talks, but I just wanted to end on a joke today. But it's a knock-knock joke, so you have to work with me. Is everybody ready for that? Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right, knock-knock. Tank. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you very much to you, too. Have a really great day.